services and possibly on crime. We already know the consequences of lead pollution in our inner cities on crime rates. This gets me very angry. So the lowest level where fluoride was lowered in Zhang's study was 1.26, because what I've done here is I've taken group B, where the median fluoride concentration 1.5, and I've subtracted the variation here. So there are some children in this group whose IQ was lowered by 5 IQ points by fluoride concentrations of 1.26. So now we can state that this leaves nowhere near an adequate margin of safety to protect all our children drinking between 0.7 and 1.2 parts per million. And we need that safety factor of 10. And can I add one more thing? In those villages, and I've asked Zhang about this, it's pretty clear to me that very few of those children would have been using fluoridated toothpaste. It's also clear that most of those children would have been breastfed and not bottle-fed. So in other words, for those two factors alone, kids in America would be getting higher doses of fluoride than those children. Plus the overlap, the high water drinkers in America would be getting more fluoride than the low drinkers, fluoride drinkers in the Chinese studies. Now, let me be clear about that. And the opposition often confuses concentration and dose. So they say, oh, well, the concentration was 2.3, and we only fluoridate at 0.7. There's no problem. Oh, yes, there is. Two communities, one drinking fluoride at 0.7 and one drinking at 2.3. Yes, the concentrations are different, but the doses will overlap because of the different volumes of water that the two individuals in the communities could be drinking. Let me say it again. A high water drinker in a community with low concentration could easily get a higher dose, milligrams per day, than a low consuming water drinker in a high fluoride community. Now, Grandjean has said this. He says, fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. Now, as promised, I want to go back to these, to this notion of the devastating effect on the population level. So IQ, like every human trait, is normally distributed, the famous bell-shaped curve, which means that the average child will have an average IQ, be clustered around the average. The bulk will be around 100. But there are two tails to the curve. This green area is the fraction of the area under the curve. That fraction of that total is the fraction of children that are very bright or geniuses. That fraction, represented by that area. And this fraction is the fraction of the total community that would be mentally handicapped, IQ less than 70. Now, if you shift the IQ curve over by 5 IQ points, shift it down by 5 IQ points, you won't notice effects. You won't notice the difference here. So a parent with two children, one with an IQ of 100, one with 95, you would not notice the difference. Someone would have to do tests to show that difference. Similarly with a school teacher, you wouldn't notice that difference. But look what happens to the tails when you shift over by just 5 IQ points. Remember, the average in the Chinese studies was 7 IQ points. You halve the number of geniuses in your society, you double the number of mentally handicapped. That is why, if you find a substance in society is a suspected neurotoxicant, you get rid of it as quickly as possible. And sometimes it may be difficult to do that because it may be a component of cell phones or something like that which people desperately want to hang on to, so there's a huge resistance to limiting that exposure to that particular toxic metal or whatever. But when it is a substance that we are deliberately adding to the drinking water, which we could stop tomorrow simply by turning off a tap, it is criminal negligence to allow this to continue. Just because a bunch of ill-educated dentists think it's good for teeth. And I say ill-educated, the dentists only get one side of this story at dental school. Look at the curriculum of every dental school in the United States, which is largely controlled by the ADA. They are not getting both sides of this issue. And then when they retire, or when they graduate, they have their own practice, they're too busy to read the literature. And so it's so easy for them just to step in line, follow what the ADA says, follow what the CDC says, and have a comfortable life. Now, not all dentists are like that. Some dentists, and I don't have anything against dentists, but some dentists have had the courage to speak out. They have read the literature, and they're appalled. A lot of them would still want to use fluoride in dentistry topically, but a lot of them agree with us that we shouldn't be putting it in the drinking water. But I would hope that any doctor, any dentist, any scientist, any public health official, that when they see this would say, enough is enough. Stop this foolish, reckless practice. And again, think of Mother Nature. What she said, the baby shouldn't get any fluoride, or very little. Now, we asked, Zhang presented a paper at our conference, the FAN conference in Crystal City, Virginia, just a few weeks ago, early September. We asked him for all of his data. Now, what's the relevance of this particular table? It's probably gobbledygook to many of you. Right now, the EPA could end fluoridation tomorrow, the EPA. The EPA regulates contaminants in water. The current standard is 4 parts per million, but they were asked by the National Research Council to revisit that standard based upon their review from 2006. So 8 years later, we're still waiting for the EPA to do a second risk assessment, another risk assessment, come up with a new MCLG, maximum contaminant level goal. Now, they've made it clear that they want to get this MCLG, do it, but they want to protect children's teeth. That's what they say. Totally illegitimate. The EPA should have nothing to say about perceived benefits of a contaminant. Their job is to tell us accurately, scientifically, and honestly what a safe level is. And it should not be influenced by this practice, the need to defend this practice. So what have they done? They've said the most sensitive endpoint of fluoride's toxicity is severe dental fluorosis. And that's what they're going to do their risk assessment on. Now, I say that if that is the case, if severe dental fluorosis is the most sensitive endpoint for fluoride toxicity, and if you protect for that, you'll protect the bones and you protect every tissue, then the EPA would have to show that in all 41 IQ studies, all the children in those studies that had their IQ lowered would have to have severe dental fluorosis. If any of those children in any of those studies showed a lowering of IQ at very mild or moderate dental fluorosis, their hypothesis collapses and they would have to treat lowered IQ as the most sensitive endpoint. Now let's make sense of this table. These numbers are the severity of dental fluorosis. No dental fluorosis, very mild, moderate, and severe. Let's look at the IQ. The IQ is lowered from 99 to 94 for very mild. For mild, even further, and for moderate, by almost 8 IQ points. In other words, the EPA, if they were honest, would have to say severe dental fluorosis is not the most sensitive endpoint, In this case, it's lowered IQ. Anybody here not understand that? Because we're trying to educate these incredibly well-credentialed people at the Office of Water that this is something that they should be looking at and investigating and making a decision on. And so the question now becomes, what's going to rule at the US EPA? Is it going to be politics, the need to defend this practice for the Health and Human Services Department, or is it going to be science and the need to protect the American people? That's what you're going to see. That's going to unveil before your eyes. You can see if our campaign is going to win or whether politics is going to outgun us yet again. And this is what's problematic about this is the Department of Health and Human Services is a huge government entity, and the EPA is relatively small. And so can this little small entity, EPA, stand the political pressures from the Department of Health and Human Services? Okay. How are we doing for time? All right, let's go into almost the last of this thing. Fluoridation is ineffective. When I started this, I thought at least that we would find that the evidence that fluoridation actually reduces tooth decay was very strong. That all the arguments were about whether it's safe or not. That was what I was expecting. What surprised me is how weak the evidence is that swallowing fluoride actually reduces tooth decay. And here's the evidence. Number one, they've never done a randomized controlled trial to demonstrate that swallowing fluoride reduces tooth decay. Incredible. Never done it in nearly 70 years. Two, the CDC's evidence is very weak. I'll show you that in a moment. Little difference in tooth decay in 12-year-olds between fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries. You've already seen that. Four, I can talk about the largest survey in the United States, the most precise study in the United States, and some observations from Bill Osmondson. All this evidence that indicates that swallowing fluoride does little to reduce tooth decay. But let me go through it. I'm going to jump over that and just take my word for it. There's been no randomized control trial. That is the gold standard for epidemiology. Two, the CDC's weak evidence. In the paper that supported the statement that fluoridation is one of the top public health achievements of the 20th century, there's just one figure in that paper. And it shows mean DMFT, that's decayed, missing and filled teeth, the measure of tooth decay, from the 60s to the present is coming down. And on the same graph, the percentage of Americans drinking fluoridated water is going up. And voila, cause and effect, tooth decay is going down because the percentage of Americans drinking fluoridated water is going up. So tooth decay in 12-year-olds coming down, percentage of the US population drinking fluoridated water going up. If a student tried to get away with that nonsense in one of my classes, I would have failed them. This isn't cause and effect. The sale of telephone directories could have been going up by the same amount. Doesn't mean they're connected. Okay, so couldn't they have compared it with this? This is the American line. They're saying that this is coming down because of the percentage of American children drinking fluoridated water. If they just went to the World Health Organization and saw all those countries that were not drinking fluoridated water, how could they maintain that fiction? Now, either that was just absolutely incompetence or it was fraud. That graph that I showed you is either incompetence or it's fraud, deliberately deceiving the American people. Okay, this is the largest survey of tooth decay ever carried out in the United States. Cost about $4 million. They looked at 39,000 children in 84 communities. In Table 6, the authors compared children who'd always lived in their lives in a fluoridated community with kids who'd always lived their lives in a non-fluoridated community. And the measure of tooth decay was DMFS, decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. Just said that. In the permanent teeth. So by the time all the teeth have come out, there's 128 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth. The cutting teeth, that's the top 6 and the bottom 6, they have 4 surfaces. They don't count the cutting edge. All the rest of the teeth, the chewing teeth if you like, have 5 surfaces. So the average for 5 to 17-year-olds in fluoridated communities was 2.8 DMFS, 2.8 decayed, missing or filled surfaces. And in the non-fluoridated communities, it was 3.4. If you subtract one from the other, the average difference for 5 to 17-year-olds is a saving of 0.6 of one tooth surface. Now, so that you understand this, this is the number I'm looking at here. 2.79, 2.8, 3.39, 3.4. Now, look what they did to this. They didn't report a saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface. They didn't mention tooth surface as the saving. It was they converted it to a percentage. So let's do that percentage calculator. I don't know if these colors are visible, but if you take 2.8 from 3.4, it's 0.6, what I've said. And that's 0.6 out of 128 tooth surface, which is an absolute saving of 0.47%. But if you make it a relative difference, as a percentage, 0.6 over the higher number, 0.6 over 3.4 times 100 is an 18% difference. So here's that 18% difference. So now I want you to see the abstract and see how these people mislead the American public. And it's not dishonest because these numbers are correct. This 18% number is correct, but it actually means a saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface. So I'll read this with you. Children who had always been exposed to community water fluoridation had a mean DMF scores about 18% lower than those who had never lived in fluoridated communities. When some of the background effect of topical fluoride was controlled, the difference increased to 25%. The results suggest that water fluoridation has played a dominant role in the decline in caries and must continue to be a major prevention methodology. Now, there's a lot of officials out there who will never read the whole paper, will never get to Table 6, and will never find out that this major benefit is 0.6 of a tooth surface. And that's what all the angst is about. That's for what we're going to risk our bones, our brains, and our thyroid gland for, a saving, average saving of 0.6. That is the largest study done in the United States, and it was funded by the US taxpayers, and it was done by the National Institute of Dental Research. It's their own literature which tells you that this practice is lousy. Not only was this 0.6 of one tooth surface, in my view, trivial in terms of the risk we're taking, they didn't even show it was statistically significant. And yet this number is banded around, this 18% number or the 25% number. You'll see it in the literature being handed out in Boyne City. The lifetime savings is 25% tooth decay. It's coming from this paper. Now let me show you an example. So beware of tooth decay savings reported as a relative percentage difference rather than what the absolute saving is. Now in Queensland in 2007, they were going to bring in mandatory fluoridation for the whole state. And this is what they said in newspaper advertisements. In Townsville, which was fluoridated, the water supplies have been fluoridated since 1964, resulting in 65% less tooth decay in children than those in Brisbane. Now imagine, put yourselves in the position of a citizen in Queensland, and you hear that if you fluoridate, you're going to have a 65% reduction in tooth decay in children. That's what they said. Let's look at what that actually was. Here's the data. Here's the paper. Here's the data. Here's the 65% saving, relative saving. The saving was 0.17 of one tooth surface. Now what if that full-page advertisement, or that advertisement may not have been full-page, what if they said that? If we fluoridate Queensland, Brisbane, we're going to say 0.17 of one tooth surface out of 128 tooth surfaces. Different impression, right? So now I've gone from the largest study in the United States. Now let's look at the most precise study in the United States. Because hitherto, all the studies in tooth decay have compared fluoridated populations with non-fluoridated populations. The measure of population. And that's a very crude thing to do, because some kids in a fluoridated community could be drinking bottled water and not getting much fluoride. And kids in the non-fluoridated community could be drinking beverages being imported from fluoridated communities. So it's a pretty arbitrary thing. But this one was nothing arbitrary about this. This is the famous Iowa study where they've been examining children from birth. And what they were able to do in this study was to calculate exactly how much fluoride each kid was getting on a daily basis from food, from water, and from dental products. So they had a complete measure of fluoride exposure by individual. And then they looked at the tooth decay in these kids. And they found no clear relationship between how much fluoride the kids were swallowing on a daily basis and tooth decay. And this is what they concluded. These findings suggest that achieving a caries-free status may have relatively little to do with fluoride intake. Government-funded study. So why are we putting in the drinking water if they can't find that relationship? They were looking to find the optimal dose of fluoride that reduces tooth decay, and they couldn't find it. Now, these are Bill Osmundson's. He's a dentist. For 25 years he promoted fluoridation. Now he's opposed to it. And he looked at the results of 50 questionnaires. Questionnaires that were administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, pro-fluoridation, in 50 states. So 50 different questionnaires. And one of the questionnaires on this, one of the questions on the questionnaires was, does your child have good, very good or excellent teeth? And what Bill has recorded here is the answer yes. Your kid has very good or excellent teeth. Now he superimposed the answers against the 50 states where this line represents the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water. So what are you expecting? If this policy is sound, aren't you expecting that the answer yes is going to go, you're going to have more people answering yes at that end than this end, right? The percentage of fluoridation goes up, the number of people with parents saying their children have very good or excellent teeth. Well, this is for low-income families. It's noisy, but it's essentially flat. I mean, you couldn't look anywhere along this line and predict where it was, which state it was. Now look at the response from high-income families. Not much noise in this. So this is about 80%, and this is just under 50 or 60%. So you don't see a relationship with fluoridation, but what you do see is a relationship between income levels. Dental disease is a function of poverty. And as your income levels go up, your tooth decay in your kids go down. Unless you're bombarding them with sugar, candy, and all that other stuff. Because the people that had the best teeth in the world were indigenous people before they were exposed to Western diet, refined flour and sugar and all the other crap that we eat. So barring that change, in the United States, tooth decay will be highest amongst the lowest income. Finally, there are better ways of fighting tooth decay in low-income families. Most of the tooth decay, I think it's about 80% of the tooth decay is concentrated in about 20% of the population, which is low-income population. We need to target those families with better dental services. Now we go into a problem, because 80% of US dentists will not treat children on Medicaid. Precisely the children that need the dental services are not getting them from these professional dentists. And they need better dental education, and they need better diet. They shouldn't be forced to swallow a substance that they can't avoid and puts them at greater disadvantage because of fluoride's toxic effects. Are most drastic. Fluoride's toxicity is most drastic if your diet is poor. That's been demonstrated in India. If you have low protein, you have low vitamins, you have low calcium, fluoride's toxicity is going to be worse. In Scotland, instead of water fluoridation, the Scottish government opted for a dental program called Child Smart. This is what they do. They teach kids to brush their teeth in nursery school. As soon as they get into kindergarten, the youngest kids, teach them how to brush their teeth. At the same time, they're giving those kids healthy snacks in schools. Not sugary drinks and all that stuff, carrots, vegetables, whatever. And at the same time, they're working with the parents to learn these dental hygiene skills and the better diet. Each child gets an annual checkup, treated if necessary, maybe a fluoride varnish, and the proportion of children aged 4 to 6 without obvious dental decay has risen from 42% in '96 to 67% in 2012. And for the 10 to 12-year-olds, the children without dental decay has risen from 53% in 2005 to 73% in 2013. They are way ahead of schedule. I think it was 70% by 2015 was their goal. And this is all data from the Scottish government. Now we're talking areas like Glasgow, where you've got a lot of low-income families, notorious for tooth decay. The researchers from Glasgow found that this scheme has halved the cost of treating dental disease in 5-year-olds from between 2001 and 2010. So here we have a cost-effective program, fairly benign. It's involved better diet, just brushing teeth, etc. Very simple, common sense things, not forcing fluoride on people, and yet it's working and it's cost-effective. So the message is our kids need more brushing, more fruit and vegetables, less sugar. Less sugar means less tooth decay and less obesity. And there's the financial thing. I mean, if you're trying to persuade the government to use education, not fluoridation, that's the hook. You're going to save money. If you reduce the number of kids with obesity, the number of kids with diabetes, and other health problems, you're going to save this country millions of dollars in healthcare in the future. So it's worth putting this money in. Less obesity means less diabetes. In other words, education to promote less sugar consumption is a very good investment. So we need education, not fluoridation, to fight tooth decay and obesity in our kids. I've been through this, the EPA, so that's good. We've been through that. Let me just get to the end of this. All right. We're very close to the end for those who are wilting a bit. There's a brilliant DVD from David Kennedy, a dentist from San Diego, called Fluoride Gate, which exposes some of the politics that's gone on at the EPA on this issue. I urge you to watch that. I think you could watch it from our webpage. So here's the summary then. Fluoridation is unusual, it's unnatural, it's unethical, it's unnecessary, it's unsafe, it's ineffective, and other countries have demonstrated that there are other and better ways of fighting tooth decay in the whole population. Fluoridation is an obsolete practice, and it is time to end it in Traverse City and anywhere else it is currently practiced. Now, I just want to give you some good news now. Communities ending or rejecting fluoridation. Since 2010, over 157 communities have either stopped it or rejected new proposals in a variety of countries. And you can find the complete listing on our webpage, fluoridealert.org. In Portland, Oregon last year, despite the fact that they were outspent and by $1 million to $300,000, were able to defeat an attempt to fluoridate Portland by stealth, essentially. And they won the vote 61% to 39%. That was a remarkable achievement from the grassroots there in Portland, Oregon. Because they had everybody against them. They had the newspapers against them. They had all the organizations against them. But they still managed to educate the public and win, despite being outspent 3-1. One of the despicable things that the other side did was to actually give community groups $20,000 each just to come out in favor of fluoridation. That's all they had to do. Just sign a little statement and say we're for fluoridation. It should. The Israeli Minister of Health announced the end of fluoridation in Israel. Not just the end of mandatory fluoridation, but the end of fluoridation, period, completely. And that's sending shockwaves. I've just been in Ireland, where Ireland also has mandatory fluoridation. They could be next. So fluoridation banned in Israel. Resources. First of all, this is available for free online. This is the Bible of Toxicology on fluoride. It's pretty complicated for a non-scientist to get through this. So that's one of the reasons that we produced our book. That's a little bit easier to get through. Our webpage has the largest health database on fluoride in the world. Click on researchers. There's some excellent videotapes which I urge you to watch. This is my favorite 28 minutes. My favorite tool. Go there, download it onto a disk, make as many copies as you want. If you don't know how to download a program, find someone under 12 to be able to do it for you.
Paul, is it Fluoride Action or FluorideAlert.org?
Oh, thank you. How did I make that mistake? It's FluorideAlert.org.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Fluoride Alert. Woo! Now, another one is my son, Michael Connett. He's done 10 facts on fluoride. That's only 20 minutes. You might want to watch that too. And then I have interviews with Chris Bryson, the author of The Fluoride Deception. John Cahoon, who's one of my all-time heroes, who was the principal dental officer in Auckland, New Zealand. A passionate promoter of fluoridation, both as a researcher and as a counselor, but then he changed his mind after he read the literature more closely. Same with Hardy Lineback, a promoter of fluoridation, one of Canada's chief dental researchers, came out against fluoridation. Bill Osmondson, a dentist, also promoted fluoridation for 25 years until he read the literature. And Bill Hersey, who's a former senior scientist at the EPA and is now working for us in Washington. He's our Washington representative. So please, get back to the beginning. Please examine both sides. Keep that open mind. The ADA's website and our website, hopefully I got it right there, yes, fluoridealert.org. And I'm not going to go any further. That's it. I'm sorry it took a bit long. If we can put the lights on, because I just see you silhouetted there. I want to see your faces. Questions? Yes?
Laura Middaugh from Buckley, Michigan. I have 3 easy to remember questions.
Okay.
Number 1, is it getting into our well water? Number 2, who is benefiting from the addition of the fluoride? And number 3, if you happen to know, are they fluoridating the water in Spain?
In what?
Spain.
Oh yeah, okay, good questions, good questions. The first one is it getting into your well water? I think what's in your well water is going to be a reflection of what rocks the water goes through until it gets to the source of water for your well. So I think it's going to be more a reflection of your geology of your area than it is going to be runoff or water coming from the fluoridation supply. But you should check it out. You should get your water tested. It shouldn't be too expensive. The second question, I'm going to do the second question last because that's the biggie. The Spain. About 11% of the population in Spain is fluoridated. About 11%. And much of it is in Basque Country. Basque Country. Now, I happen to have done a lot of waste work in Basque Country. I've made some close friends there. They're very strong on zero waste and fighting incinerators. I'm in the process of trying to use those contacts so that next time I go to Spain, I should be talking about fluoridation as well as waste. So I may have good news for you a few years from now, or a few months from now, who knows? Now, who benefits from fluoridation? Can I take my coat off? Who benefits from fluoridation? It's a better way of saying it, because it doesn't say that these people are behind fluoridation. It's just that they're benefiting from it. Okay. Number one, the sugar industry benefits from fluoridation because it deflects parents' attention from the real cause of tooth decay, which is not too little fluoride, but too much sugar. In fact, 1 year before the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation, the sugar lobby, in its magazine, The Sugar Molecule, said, we need to find a way of reducing tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. And they then proceeded to put a lot of money into nutrition departments, even funding nutrition departments at places like Harvard University, to get professors to promote the nutritional value of sugar and also to promote fluoridation. So they very clearly latched on to fluoridation as being the magic bullet for diversion of attention. One of those was Dr. Fred Stair, who became the chairman of the nutrition department at Harvard. He testified in Congress that Coca-Cola was a nutritious drink. He also promoted fluoridation, and he was an early forerunner of the vitriol. The vitriol, you see, directed against opponents of fluoridation. They can't deal with our science, they can't deal with our arguments, so they have to attack us personally. And every time they do that, we should rub our hands, because if you have to attack a person personally, it means you can't deal with their arguments. And he started that. Another thing he did, when Rachel Carson published a fantastic book in 1962, he attacked her vociferously, said that she had no science in her book, which was absolute nonsense, and so on. And I think he actually said, why should she worry about future generations? She's a spinster. Vicious man, vicious. He was also a founder of the American Council on Science and Health, which posed as an environmental health organization. It's actually a front for industry. It's industry funded. Their director recently passed away, Elizabeth Whalen. They couldn't find a chemical that they didn't like, including dioxins. Active, very active promoters of fluoridation, and which industries that they were doing that for. Obviously, another beneficiary is the phosphate fertilizer industry, where the fluoridating chemicals come from. They would have to pay a fortune to get rid of it in a hazardous waste facility. There are some uses for the fluorosilicic acid, but I don't think not enough to use it all up, apart from putting it in the water. So they're a beneficiary. And a beneficiary, and I'm not suggesting a conspiracy theory here, but a beneficiary, when you look at the side effects of fluoride in people that are sensitive, they complain of chronic fatigue, tiredness not relieved by sleep, irritability, headaches, gastrointestinal problems. Huge money making. Oh, lower thyroid function. One of the biggest selling drugs on the market is the drug to treat hypothyroidism. Other drugs, painkillers, for stomach problems, for rashes, for so on. So there's a lot of money being made by the pharmaceutical industry for the side effects from fluoride. And those are just the light ones. When we get into other bigger ones like bone problems and so on, there could be much more there. So they're a beneficiary, but not necessarily an organizer of the whole practice. Then I think you have to switch to liabilities. I think the ADA, having got its seal of approval on every fluoride product out there in dentistry, has a liability. And they're very sensitive to liability. That's why they keep mercury amalgams going, because they don't want to admit that they cause harm. So And then you've got the toothpaste manufacturers and those dental products, they've all got fluoride in it. I think their feeling is if the fluoridation is lost, then they are going to be in trouble with liabilities. So, in other words, the health effects start to come through, they're proved, and they're proved in a court of law. It won't just be water departments or municipalities that get sued. It could well also be manufacturers of fluoridated toothpaste, etc., etc., etc. And same with the ADA. I think they're worried about liabilities. And lastly, I think it's loss of credibility is the big concern in the public health community. I think their equation is if you lose fluoridation, you lose your credibility, you lose the public's trust, and that threatens other public health practices. And when you start to think of other public health practices, number one on the list as far as making money is vaccination. So it's quite conceivable that this intense activity to keep fluoride going is defending vaccination by proxy. In other words, you defend fluoridation as long as possible because you know that the next battle is going to be trying to persuade people who've lost their trust in you now for vaccination. Pure conjecture on my part, but I'm struggling, as many of you probably have done also, to try to find a rational explanation for irrational behavior. And the practice of fluoridation by our government is irrational behavior. It does not have a scientific basis. It never did. It never did. When the US Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation in 1950, not one single trial had been completed, and there was no health data published. So how could that have been a scientific judgment? Obviously, politics were operating at that time. And all the other agencies that then proceeded to endorse it. You hear about endorsements all the time, right? Endorsements, this agency, this agency. Well, they all joined the bandwagon in 1950, 51, and 52. All those organizations that are cited today just followed his or her master's voice. And the US Public Health Service said, let's go ahead, chaps. They all fell into line with no science. No science. Yes?
Could there be any other reason, or do you know of any other reason, that the American Water Works Association, which is a private entity, not a government entity, that controls most all of the municipally supplied water in the United States, why they would be so vehemently and zealotry in their support of adding fluoride to water?
I should imagine the lobbying power.
I mean, does fluoride make chlorine work better? I mean, is there anything?
No, there's no rational reason. There's no rational reason. And obviously, you'd have to look for political reasons. And one of the things which happened in 1986, they did a little juggling, and EPA lost its responsibility for regulating additives to drinking water. And their responsibility today is to regulate contaminants. That's their only jurisdiction they have, is regulating contaminants. And that still could end water fluoridation, not additives. And so who then regulates additives? And the answer is this quasi-government private entity called the National Sanitation Foundation. And if you notice, their regulations have AWWA on it. So they work very closely, the NSF and the AWWA work closely in these regulations and so on, defending those regulations. So I suspect that's where you've got a very close relationship with the practice. And if you question the safety about the standards or what chemicals they're putting in, people like the CDC will refer to the NSF. The NSF takes care of this, and the NSF with the AWWA, they have got a handle on the toxicity of these substances, and their standards protect us all equivalent. So it's a puzzle, though. It's a puzzle, really, why the ADA, AWWA, except it's, if you like, it's the establishment. It's the medical, dental, public health establishment. This is their pet project. You can understand, by the way, you should know this. Dentists are very proud of this practice. They feel that this is their contribution to public health. Their contribution to public health. They're proud of it. And if you look at the history, the dentistry, it became a part of medicine, a part of the medical establishment in the 1940s on the back of the fluoridation research program. So the fluoridation research program that established that fluoride in water fights tooth decay, all the people, the key people in that research program went on to become the leading figures in the National Institute of Dental Research. The National Institute of Dental Research is a huge building in Bethesda, Maryland, part of the NIH, part of the National Institute of Health, built in 1948. So you start the fluoridation trials in 1945, the US Public Health Service endorses them in 1950, but meanwhile, this huge establishment has come into being called the National Institute of Dental Research. And what that meant is that dentistry could now draw on that great pot of research money from the national government, from the National Institutes of Health. So if you like, before then, dentistry was like plumbing. You just went in there, filled this, shoved in that, go pulled this out, did, you know, whatever. Probably did a nice job. But they weren't seen as part of medicine, part of the people that could draw on that big research money. And to this day, if you want to get easy research money and you're a dental researcher, find something to do with fluoridation, because they love it. Money gets like the gravy train for dental research. It's just study something to do with fluoridation, and to make sure in the first paragraph you say fluoridation is the best thing since sliced bread. You've got to put that in there, right in the first paragraph, in the abstract. Yes?
One thing before I ask my question. I'm just wondering how many people noticed any of our city commissioners in this meeting?
Yes,
We
we
have
can.
one.
We have one? Yeah! That's the only one you...
This man's a local hero.
For
He's
us last time. They should all be here.
Our favorite city commissioner.
Yeah.
Here.
This is why we need the people to be allowed to vote, because none of the rest of the guys are even trying to study. I sent them links to different things like this and asked them questions to back up what things that they were trying to say. There was no response anytime I asked. So they are not looking into the science of this. I'm glad that you are, but this is why the process of having a bunch of people stand up and say one little thing in 3 minutes doesn't work. We need an actual scientific forum and a platform where if they have a complaint, like he said, about one study, and that doctor comes up there, well, I looked at studies and I found some flaws in it. You can't just say that without saying, this is the flaw. This is why it's wrong. This is BS to sit there and, just because you've got a white coat and you're a dentist, you get to go and influence people like this. It's baloney. That's why we need to get this on our ballot somehow.
Yeah. Okay, you've started the campaign. I think over the next year, you're going to need to campaign to get this on the ballot, and then a second campaign to win that ballot. We know that Ben and Chris here are very eager to do that, but we need a team. So let this be the beginning. Make sure your names are on a bit of paper, and you give it to Ben. If you feel that you want to stop this, get it to Ben, your list, so that you can have an organizational meeting, and you can do this as a team. They fell short by a few votes this time around, because there's only 2 or 3 of them were doing this. But you've got somebody on the commission is on your side. That's fantastic when you have that, because one of the things he can do when this comes to a public hearing, you can provide him with the key questions to ask the other side. You know, if the other side gets a solo platform, they'll bedazzle you with the endorsements and everything else. But you've got to ask them questions like this, important for your strategy. What scientific studies have you read which has convinced you that you've no need to worry about fluoride's potential to damage the brain? I was at a meeting where I heard Dr. Connett go through all the animal studies, the human studies, the IQ studies, and I was overwhelmed by that. But what studies have convinced you, doctor, dentist? What have you read that has convinced you? And then to see, they probably won't produce a primary study, they probably will produce some bit of propaganda from the ADA or something. You don't have to worry about the study. So that's what you've got to do. Organize, and if you can do that, I've told Ben I'll come back this time next year to do this again. Hopefully we'll have several hundred people at the meeting, and then we can go on and win that ballot, okay?
Well, we intend to win. Well,
Yeah, we intend to win.
We will
We
be on the
will.
ballot in November of 2015, local election. There will also be a couple of commissioner seats. We're looking for good candidates to run for city commissioner. There's two ways that will get them to stop putting the fluoride in the water. Either convince the commissioners to do it, because the commissioners in 1951, more than 63 years ago, the commissioners voted, they approved fluoride in the water. In 63 years, it's never, ever once gone to a vote of the people. We almost got it on the ballot this year. We fell a little short, and the other side was gloating. And they were bragging about how much money they spent and how they influenced the commission, and they had a public relations firm and all this stuff. And they kept us off the ballot. Okay, now we know we've made some freedom of information requests. Now, I'm not going to say that somebody's going to go to jail. But when a state official for the Michigan Department of Community Health, full-time employee, her number, she's the state fluoridation coordinator, works down in Lansing, probably makes, I don't know, $100,000 a year. She calls the Traverse City attorney, and I can't talk to the Traverse City attorney. I'm not allowed to. And they're discussing strategy, how to keep us off the ballot. Now, it may not be illegal, but it ain't right, and we've made a second freedom of information request to the Michigan Department of Community Health. I have a little experience with this. They sent me that, it takes about a month, and they come back and they said, we have granted your request. Now, it's going to cost you $900, and you need to send us half of that as a deposit. I didn't even ask my wife. I called their bluff, and I sent them a check for $450. I thought we were going to get it back. That was about a month ago. I was hoping we would get this stack of stuff, because it was about related to fluoride in Boyne City, Michigan, and Traverse City, Michigan, and this person down there. Because we already got some of the information from a little freedom FOIA request in Traverse City. So we're going to get it next week. And I called them because Dr. Connett's coming. You guys they didn't even cash my checks. I thought, well, maybe they didn't get. Maybe they're going to say it was lost in the mail or something. They didn't send it registered. So I called. I talked to the person. She said, well, that's funny because it's on my desk now. I'm looking at it right now. We're going to send you a disc, compact disc, because it's too many documents. You know, it's too expensive, and you'll get it next week.
Compact disc still costs $900?
Yeah, 15 hours. 15 hours of work. It took them. That was a month ago, so they must have worked.
They make that kind of money an hour?
3 hours of, well, whatever. So $900. It's going to cost when it comes, but next week. It didn't come in time to consult, but it will be in time for this. In 3 weeks, there's an election in Boyne City, and we've already got contacts up there with people, the media people and stuff. We are not going away. First of all, the Wreck-It Eagle thinks we have, that we no longer exist. And when Boyne City, I was at that meeting in May, where the vote by these commissioners in this beautiful little town on the east end of Lake Charlotte voted 3-2 to stop fluoride. And the people from Lansing that were there, and the people from the Michigan Dental Association and the American Dental Association, they were outraged that these three, hit.
With all due respect,
Okay,
I know that you and Chris are going to work your tails off to get this right. What I'm interested to know is how many people in this audience will be willing to work on this, to make this an issue.
Whether you're for it, against it, or indifferent, thank you for coming.
Yes, absolutely, and there was no requirement that if you came, you had to do some work later on, but I'm hoping...
Dr. Connett, I have one more question for you,
Yeah.
if we could, please. Is there any ongoing research that you know of, since we fluoridate 100% of the supply, and since less than 3% of that fluoride ever sees anybody's body, The rest of it goes out into the environment. Is there any studies going on regarding the downside environmental impact?
Very little. All I can tell you is that the guideline to protect aquatic species in Canada is 0.15 parts per million. So they allow us
They
to
have an
have
established level.
6 times more fluoride than fish in Canada. So, no, I personally don't think that we're going to find a huge amount of environmental damage. I think we should concentrate on the effects on babies. Yeah, far more serious. Yeah.
My name is Eric Welch. I worked in the water well industry for about 15 years. My big concern is I've heard that there's a cumulative poison,
Yes.
so it does accumulate.
It accumulates in the body. Yeah, in the bone. Your level of fluoride in your bone is steadily going to increase over your lifetime, and might start to increase even more so as you get older, because your kidney function gets weaker as you get older. So you're going to be getting more fluoride accumulating in your bones.
You also said that people that are iodine deficient
Yeah.
are more susceptible.
Absolutely.
Isn't that almost the entirety of the population?
12
Are we
million.
all kind of iodine deficient?
Yeah, it's about 12 million. That's the number I've seen from Kathleen Thiessen, who was on the NRC review. 12 million were thought to be borderline iodine deficient.
I take potassium iodine
Okay.
myself, and I
Okay.
give it to my children. Is that a way to counteract the effects of what minimal fluoride I would be
Well,
ingesting?
I met recently Dr. Brownstein, who's a big supporter of that. He thinks that iodine reverses the toxicity of fluoride and protects you and so on. Just be careful that you get the right doses. You don't overdose on iodine and get hyperactivity. You know, I didn't mention this, but before fluoridation began in the 1930s, there was a short experiment with putting iodine in the water in some places to fight goiter. And what happened was that, just as we feel with fluoride, you can't control the dose, and some people were getting excessive amounts of iodine, which was leading to overactive thyroid gland with too much iodine. So be very careful that your kids don't get too much iodine, and know what symptoms you have to look for excess iodine. But Brownstein is a good person to read on this. He's the guy. Yes?
Is there any chance that we could get the state to pass a law that is against the law for cities to use the water department to medicate people? And that way it would not even talk about fluoride and have to get arguments. Isn't that a no-brainer that they shouldn't be using the water department to medicate
The
us?
trouble is, okay, my concern with that is that it will be pretty obvious to everybody that what your intention is to end fluoridation. And therefore this will be seen as an anti-fluoridation move by the back door, and then you'll be portrayed as deceptive. That's what happened in Boulder, Colorado. They used that approach. You should not use the public water supply to deliver medicine. And then when they asked, no, we're not against fluoridation. We just don't want the water supply to be used for
But isn't
medicine.
that a no-brainer that they shouldn't put
Absolutely.
rat poison in our water?
Absolutely. Well, you know, then if you're talking about rat poison, that is emotive and it's misleading, because we're not talking about killing people by killing rats, by putting fluoride in the water. So they're right in that sense. Then where they make a mistake is confusing lethality with toxicity. They say you'd have to drink so many bathtubs of water before you got a toxic dose, and before then the water would have killed you, okay? So that's how they deal with lethality. We're not talking about killing people. We are talking about subtle long-term health effects, lowered thyroid function, arthritic conditions, building up in the bones, lowering of IQ. You're not killing kids, but this is very, very serious. So I don't think you should confuse the issue of fluoride as an acute poison that can kill people, kill animals. That's not what we're arguing about.
Yeah, but look at, I've got this book, we have it in our university library and our city library. Handbook of poison, and it says right in there in the index, it's listed under rat poison with 5 other rat poison.
No
question.
There was no question about it. You're accurate, okay? You're accurate in that sense. But you could say the same thing about chlorine. Chlorine gas, if you get it neat, will kill you. So chlorine is very, very toxic. But the amount of chlorine that you put in the water is not going to kill anybody. That's enough to kill the bacteria and the other vectors. Now it could kill you with cancer because of the byproducts, but that's a different issue. So you can't use the acute toxicity of a substance which is going to be diluted by a large amount to argue that it's a rat poison or it's this kind of poison. You can't argue from the neat chemical.
Except for you said it's cumulative.
It's cumulative. Well, that's different. Then you're talking about chronic